Welcome to this advanced seminar in psychological astrology and mental health. Today we examine the sophisticated interplay between natal astrology, depth psychology, and the architecture of the introspective mind, particularly the configurations that foster what we might call genius introspection. Astrology, properly understood at the collegiate level, is not predictive fortune-telling. It is a symbolic language of the psyche. Carl Gustav Jung recognized this when he wrote that astrology represents the sum of all the psychological knowledge of antiquity. In contemporary terms, the birth chart functions as a highly refined map of temperament, defense mechanisms, developmental challenges, and the innate pathways toward individuation. Let us begin with the foundational premise. The natal chart is a snapshot of the collective unconscious filtered through the unique timing of incarnation. Planets do not cause mental states. They symbolize archetypal forces that the ego must integrate or that the ego may be overtaken by. Mental health, from this perspective, is the degree of conscious relationship an individual maintains with these archetypal energies. Consider the moon. In psychological astrology, the moon represents the somatic and emotional body, the repository of early attachment patterns, implicit memory, and the capacity for self-soothing. A moon in hard aspect to Saturn frequently correlates with what clinicians might diagnose as depressive vulnerability or an internalized critical parent. Yet the same configuration, when consciously worked, produces extraordinary emotional discipline and the capacity for profound solitude that many creative geniuses require. The difference is not the aspect itself, but the level of ego strength and reflective capacity brought to it. Mercury, the planet of cognition and narrative construction, is central to mental health. Mercury's sign, house, and aspects describe the native's preferred cognitive style and the potential fault lines in information processing. Mercury square Neptune, for example, can manifest as porous boundaries between imagination and reality, a vulnerability to dissociation or delusional thinking under stress. Simultaneously, this same aspect is frequently found in the charts of poets, mystics, and theoretical physicists who access non-ordinary states of consciousness with deliberate skill. Genius introspection often requires exactly this capacity to loosen the grip of ordinary consensus reality while retaining the ability to return and articulate what was seen. Uranus and the outer planets introduce the dimension of sudden insight and radical reframing. Uranus contacts to personal planets or to the angles frequently mark individuals whose nervous systems are wired for high-voltage originality. In clinical settings, these natives may present with anxiety disorders, bipolar spectrum features, or simply a lifelong sense of alienation. Yet the same electrical quality of mind that produces restlessness also generates the lightning bolt realizations that redefine fields of knowledge. The task of psychological work with such charts is not to dampen the Uranian current, but to build sufficient grounding, often through Saturnian structures, physical embodiment practices, and carefully chosen containers for the insight process. The 12th house and its rulers deserve special attention in any discussion of mental health. Traditionally associated with hospitals, confinement, and self-undoing, the 12th house in modern psychological astrology points to the unconscious, the somatic unconscious, and the realms of experience that cannot be easily narrated. Planets in the 12th often operate outside the ego's direct control. When these planets are activated by transit or progression, material from the collective or personal shadow can flood consciousness. For some, this produces psychosis or profound oppression. For others, particularly those with strong Mercury or a well-aspect Jupiter, it becomes the crucible of mystical insight and radical empathy. Genius introspection frequently involves a deliberate descent into 12th house territory with the intention of retrieving what has been exiled. Saturn, the planet of structure, limitation, and time, is perhaps the most misunderstood in mental health contexts. Saturnian afflictions are routinely linked to depression, anxiety, and feelings of inadequacy. Yet Saturn is also the planet of mastery. The individual who has integrated Saturn develops what psychologists call earned security, a reliable internal authority that does not collapse under external pressure. Many of history's most enduring intellectual and artistic achievements were produced by natives who had learned to work patiently with Saturn rather than against it. Now let us turn specifically to the configurations that support genius-level introspection. 3 patterns appear with notable frequency. First, a strong Mercury-Saturn relationship, whether by aspect, mutual reception, or house emphasis. This combination produces a mind that is both agile and rigorous, capable of sustained concentration and of subjecting its own thought processes to continual critique. The introspective genius does not merely feel deeply, he or she thinks about feeling with precision. Second, prominent Neptune or Pisces emphasis tempered by a solid earth or air foundation. Pure Neptunian immersion risks dissolution of the observing ego. When grounded, however, it allows access to imaginal realms and archetypal imagery that ordinary cognition cannot reach. The resulting insights often feel revelatory rather than merely logical. Third, a well-developed relationship between the Sun and the outer planets, particularly Uranus and Pluto. The Sun represents the organizing center of identity. When it can hold tension with Uranian disruption and Plutonian depth, the personality becomes capable of repeated ego death and rebirth without permanent fragmentation. This is the psychological signature of individuals who reinvent their understanding of self and world multiple times across a lifetime. In clinical practice, the astrological chart offers a non-pathologizing language for experiences that modern psychiatry often reduces to symptom checklists. A client with a heavy Scorpio or 8th house emphasis is not simply borderline or obsessive. He or she is wired for intensity, for the investigation of power dynamics, and for the transformation of psychic material through crisis. Framing the experience archetypally can reduce shame and increase the client's sense of agency. It is essential, however, to maintain clear ethical boundaries. Astrology is a complementary lens, never a substitute for evidence-based mental health care. When a chart indicates significant vulnerability, for example, a heavily afflicted moon with little support, or Mars-Neptune contacts that can predispose to addictive patterns, the responsible practitioner collaborates with, rather than replaces, licensed clinicians. The ultimate contribution of psychological astrology to mental health lies in its capacity to restore meaning. In a culture that frequently treats psychological suffering as mere chemical imbalance or cognitive error, the chart reminds us that the psyche is oriented toward growth, that symptoms often carry the seed of their own resolution, and that the deepest forms of introspection are not pathological but evolutionary. As we close, consider this working hypothesis. The birth chart does not determine destiny. It describes the particular conversation the cosmos is having with a unique consciousness. Genius introspection is the art of listening to that conversation with increasing subtlety, courage, and precision, and then translating what is heard into forms that serve both the individual and the larger human project. Thank you. I welcome your questions and case discussions.